Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from the 5th chapter in the book of Romans. We made it all the way up till the first 11 verse. Therein we read and learn of the blessings and benefits of victorious Christian living, but the first phrase of what we're going to read today is for this reason. So all these blessings and all these benefits are only possible and accessible because of what the second Adam did. He undid the damage of the first Adam. But let's review some of these blessings and benefits. The first of which is justification. That is a term whereby which a guilty sinner can be declared innocent, washed as if they never sinned. And it's through by faith, we read in the first verse. But in the 9th verse, we also read that the faith has a more concrete object, that being the blood that was shed for our sake. So every salvific blessing and experience that we can know and enjoy is made possible by the atoning death, and that is described in one detail. His act of obedience on the cross undid Adam's act of disobedience in the garden. But we also have peace that transcends the worldly peace, the peace that the world offers. We're talking about the peace of John 14:27. This is just more than the cessation of conflict. It's the all-encompassing spiritual serenity that we have. And also we have access by faith. So by faith, the same avenue through which we are justified is the same reason that we have access into the grace which we stand. And Tal takes a counterintuitive approach. He is speaking of the blessings and benefits of the victorious Christian life, but the Christian life is not without struggle. It is not without difficulty. It is not without defeat. Nevertheless, with the counterintuitive mindset, we can take the fact that we are called to these trials as blessings, because they are sent for our betterment, and the character development is what makes it all worth it. And not only this, but we also exult in pressures, not knowing that pressure works endurance. Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say because of pressure. So when you are persecuted and in pain, all you can think about is the pain. All you cry for is relief. But with the knowledge that your character is being developed in it, so you are developing the trait of endurance through going through it all. And without endurance, one cannot make it. He who endures to the end, the same shall be saved. And the connected to endurance is approvedness, and approvedness hope. So because we endure, now to be approved, we have to be proven, much as a metal will go through a refining process. That term is similar in the Greek original, but the important thing is we have to prove ourselves in order to be approved. And the way we do that is by enduring the difficulties, biting up, getting going when the going gets tough, not complaining, just taking it as a blessing, and then just striving towards the hope. And the hope is one that does not disappoint, and it's evidenced by the Ruach Kadesh who lives in their heart. Verses 6 through 6 through 11 describe the love of the cross. Greater love hath no man than this, than he should lay down his life for his friends. We read in John 15:13, but who did he lay down his life for? He weighed it down for the wicked, the sinners, the wicked, and the enemies. In verses 6, 8 through 10, we're going to read each one, but the 7th verse, he kind of says that, for one shall hardly die for a righteous one, though possibly for a good one someone would even have the courage to die. So the point of voluntary self-sacrifice is just so abnormal and extraordinary that no one's gonna, if you were to lay down your life, it would have to be for an especially righteous one. But this one, his righteousness is sufficient to be imputed to our account, and that's how we receive the justification, the blood, verse 9. But Yahweh proves his own love for us, in that while we were still sinners, Messiah died for us, verse 8. He did not die for the saved, he did not die for the elect, he died for the sinners who became elect and became saved because he died for them. So the us is plural, but it is not universal. The us is the believing Christians who accept that the foundation of their salvation is rooted in that their own sin, and the only thing we contribute to our salvation is the sin that we're being saved from. And we have to have an awareness and acknowledgement that even though we have been redeemed, even though we have been washed anew, we still struggle with sin. But the point is that he loves us and paid the price for it, and sin is never put a period when it could be just a comma. Much more than having now been justified by his blood, we shall be saved from wrath through him. So the justification, remember, we're justified by faith, and the faith has a definite concrete object, that being the atoning blood, and more specifically that it was spilled for our sinful behalfs. He was paying this sin penalty, and through that we will be saved and spared from the wrath. So the end of this life, it's not going to be pleasant if we do not accept this offer. A gift is only as valid as that which is accepted. So we have to take these words and run with them and live by them. For if being enemies we are restored to grace with Yahweh through the death of his Son, much more we have been restored to favor. We shall be saved for his life. We have to recognize that before we became children of Elohim, we were his enemies. Even though a lot of us didn't believe in him, we waged war on him nevertheless. But we have been redeemed and restored through our repentance to grace. And it's made all possible through the death. So the atoning death, once more, everything ties back in that fact. But the blessing and benefit is the restoration to grace. To be restored is to be lost to begin with. So before we were found, we were lost. That's how it all happened. That's the cycle of salvation. But we shall be saved by his life. So even though they killed him and he died on the cross, he was eternally alive. He was in the beginning. He was before the beginning. He is the Alpha and the Omega. Same yesterday, today, and forever. So he's an eternally alive being. And through the death, the death when the Word became flesh and assumed the infirmities of the flesh, then he bore the full brunt of our sin penalty. And through his death, we paradoxically gain life. We just have to read the 11th verse to connect it, because remember, the "for this reason" opens the 12th verse. And not only this, but we also exalt in Yahweh through our Master Yahshua Messiah, through whom we have now received the restoration to favor. We're just going to read the 12 for the sake of connecting it narratively. Lesson itself. For this reason, even as though one man's sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men, because all sinned. The one man is identified by Adam in name in most translations, but here the inference is unmistakable. This is our primordial ancestor, and he had a pristine paradise with his every conceivable want, need, and desire satisfiable without toil, without effort, yet he blew it all because there was no one to steal from, there was no one to cheat on, there was no one to kill, there was no one to lie to, but he had the one commandment that he could not eat from the tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and then his Eve comes through him, through his rib. So Eve does not have the direct commandment from Yahweh. Adam does, and the telephone game that he communicates to Eve really catches her off guard and at deception when the serpent slithers in and reels his nefarious suggestion. But the point is that Adam had the commandment that he was to not eat, and he knew that he would die that very day if he did. But so profound was his love for his helpmate that he would rather die with her than live without her for an eternity. So Adam's only sin was that he loved his wife more than the God who gave him to her. Does that make him a horrible human being? There's something almost noble in his sin, but we shouldn't romanticize it, because from this sin, the entire created cosmos are at disequilibrium. The planet is stained by sin, and he surrendered his dominion of the earth that had been given to it. Henceforth, Satan, the author of sin, the tempter of sin, rules the earth. But, we reap the consequences of this, and we reap the consequences of our own sin. So even though Paul ascribes primary blame to Eve in other epistles, here he casts the blame squarely on the shoulder of Adam. But we should not use either one of these scapegoats just because it is our inescapable inheritance to him. We are still responsible and accountable through all our sins. All sin, that's a universal term. Everyone who's ever lived, everyone who's ever will live, and everyone who has lived has all sinned. It is the defining trait of the human condition. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not reckoned when there is no law. The law provides an absolute standard for morality, and the danger of moral relativity is the Jews were protected of this by the law. This was the express standards. To sin is to deviate from the mark. It's rooted in a Greek term, archery term, to miss the mark. So when we sin, we deviate according to our intended purpose that we were made for. But the Torah put it all in writing. So the Jews had the definite, and even the Gentiles, they had the conscience. They didn't maybe have even a concept of sin, but they still sinned nevertheless. But the Jews, they had an absolute standard by which to obey, and the dangerous consequences of moral relativity is being reaped today, because what does it do? It teaches everyone to determine their own truth, so they rely on their feelings, their heart, rather than their brain. And the human heart is three things, according to Jeremiah 17:9. It is deceitful, it is desperately wicked, and it is incomprehensible. But death reigned from Adam until Moses, even over all those who had not sinned, according to the likeness of the transgression of Adam, who is a type of him who was to come. Death reigned throughout the dispensations. We're talking a leap of 4 dispensations. Adam was created in innocence, and when he sinned, that's unleashed the dispensation of conscience, and after that, after the flood, man's sin-induced, ineradicably evil nature necessitated the formation of government. That's the 3rd dispensation. And then the 4th dispensation is the promise that was given to Abraham, that through him would be a nations born, and a redeemer born from that nation. And then the 5th dispensation is the term through which God relates to humanity. So he related to Israel through the law, much as he related to Abraham through the promise. So they had these ethical expectations and guidelines, but even before the absolute standard, human had a concrete certainty of what morally absolutes were. He is an absolutely righteous being, and he does speak to us in absolutes. But all these dispensations, sin still reigned the earth. It was instilled invariably and irreversibly in the sin nature. Even the non-believers and the believers, we all sin. But our sin is not always specifically identical to the sin of Adam. We describe that in detail. Eve's sin was the longing and aspiration to be God, and this is identical to the original sin of Lucifer. Satan fell because he wanted to be like God, and he instilled that same insidious suggestion in Eve's ears, and it sounded good. So Satan comes, with deceiving. He is a deceiver, and he is an accuser, and he is all these things. But regardless of their sin or our sins are manifold. These were just the first sins that they ever committed. Our sins are our own burden and own responsibility. But Adam is a typological illusion. He points to the second Adam to undo the curse that he inadvertently leashed on the world. Adam was not a horrible, horrible human being, but he did reap devastating consequences just because he was the first human who ever lived. But this was all necessary in redemptive history. The serpent was sent by the sovereign behest and permission of Elohim to tempt Adam. But the favorable gift is not like the trespass, for if by one man's trespass many died, how much more the grace of Yahweh and in the gift and favor of the one man, Yahshua Messiah, overflowed to many. The favorable gift, the gift of salvation, this is the most gracious allowance of his generosity, is so worlds away from the trespass. So it is because, once more, the only thing we contribute to our salvation is the sin we are being saved from. So we do not deserve the favorable gift because our sin-stained condition disqualifies us. But it would be manifestly unjust and therefore inconsistent with the divine nature to impose an inescapable sentence of death of everyone for no greater sin than being born with the sin nature. So he does provide a way out. He does provide a way of life. And he did that through the redeeming history. He sent his own son he was the Redeemer promised in the proto-evangelism, who would be born of a woman, Eve, but he was also from high, so he combined the divine human duality. But we mustn't minimize the humanness of his aspect, because he was culpable, and he was culpable. The temptations were real. He was not automatically, he still had to go through everything that we go through as humans. But because of this just merciful, just provision of the bounty of God, just what the life that this man offers in exchange for the death, which is the consequence that we reap from Adam and ourselves. And the favorable gift is not as by one having sinned, for indeed the judgment was one to condemnation, but the favorable gift is of many trespasses unto righteousness. This favorable gift is not because of sin. It is not. It is because of sin, but it is not from sin that this emerges. The one who paid the price of our sin penalty was the one who was born without sin, lived without sin, and died without sin. And because he combined the divine human duality unstained by sin, he alone was constitutionally capable to procure our propitiation, to satisfy the wrath of God that he reserves for sin. So with all who are in Messiah are spared from the condemnation. We have no condemnation. The law brings condemnation, but this is communicated in the second verse of the 8th chapter. So one of the blessings and benefits of belonging to him is that we are spared from the judgment and the wrath, and there are no condemnations for those who are in him and have access to this graceful gift. And the most marvelous thing about it is that it atones simultaneously for all the sins, that past, present, future. There is no element of limitation in how, but even though it is sufficient for the entire world, it is only efficient for those who believe. For if by the trespass of the one death reigned through the one, much more those who receive this overflowing grace and the gift of righteousness shall reign in life through the one, Yahshua Messiah. So the one of the greatest things about belonging to him is to be privileged to co-reign the earth. We will stand in judgment over the unsaved and the unbelievers in that blessed and final day. And this gift of righteousness, it does not come from us. It is a gift, and we have to accept it. So the righteousness does not come from us, because on our best days, our best works are likened to filthy rags before him who is without blemish, Isaiah 64:6. So we have to have an alien. We have to be clothed in the righteousness of one whose righteousness is sufficient to atone for our own. And he did that through the death. So the greatest mathematical precision emerges that through the one act of disobedience in the garden and the act of obedience, which he was human, we witnessed the flesh nature in him struggle in his prayer in Gethsemane, but that is his ultimate act of obedience, to not summon the legions of angels at his disposal, but to go through this, to bear the merciless penalty of sinful men for all the sins past, present, and future. He struggled with that, but he said, if there was any other way that mankind might be saved, let this cup pass from my hand. Nevertheless, not as I will, but thou will be done. So then, as through one trespass there resulted condemnation to all men, so also through one righteous act there resulted justification of life to men. So the singularity of this one trespass has a definite point and personal origin. It is Adam, the father of the human race, but it's something we all inherit, and we are all condemned, and we die because of sin, and we suffer because of sin, and we are sick because of sin, and we decay because of sin, and we die without sin. Adam could have lived to be forever in this splendid paradise with every literally heaven on earth, well, not quite as blessed as what awaits us, but close. So it was a good thing, and he was designed to fall. There was a definite purpose in doing what he did. But the one righteous act mitigates and neutralizes all the damage that is reaped through the reciprocal ripple effects of the sin that set in motion sin's inexorable march, so much so that creation groans for redemption from the sin which consumes it. And the justification of life to all men, once more, this is not this should not be interpreted as an endorsement of the erroneous doctrine of universalism. I wish everyone could be saved, but only a remnant shall find the way. So even though it is sufficient, it is satisfactory, and the power is manifest, it is sufficient to emerge and manifest in everyone who's ever lived, but it is only efficient for those who believe. Belief is the key which unlocks the power. For as through the disobedience of one man, many were made sinners, so also through the disobedience of the one, many shall be made righteous. Now, the word many, we should not read it at literal face value, because many, first off, he's saying all. Disobedience of one man, many were made sinners. We all inherit. Adam did not tempt us or do anything to us, but we do bear his DNA. We did inherit the propensity to sin, the delight and satisfaction, and the vulnerability to sin. Sin, there's a lot of, sin is pleasant for a season, but, the wages thereof are death. But we all cannot point the finger. We should not cast blame. The main sinner we need to work on is the one in the mirror. And I am looking at myself right now, so that look as if I were a mirror, shall we say. But the obedience, just the profound agony that he endured for our sakes, though we didn't deserve it, in the Garden of Gethsemane and on the cross and in Golgotha and Calvary Hill. Just the overwhelming grace is just sufficient for all that. But we shall be made righteous, not because we are righteous, but through the imputation of his alien righteousness. An imputation is a distinct from an impartation. An imputation means we enter. We are judged just as he is, blameless and without sin. And the law came in besides, so that the trespass would increase. But where sin increased, grace increased still more. Paul sets the record straight for the Judaizers, the Pharisees, the ones who were artificially, legalistically inclined. They thought that the Torah, the law of Moses, mitigated and neutralized some of the damage, but on contrary, the law only served to expose. So having these moral absolutes, they knew where they had gone wrong, and the point of the law was to point to the abject folly of trying to save yourself. It was a schoolmaster likened to by the Apostle Paul in Galatians. So it was an inferior form of revelation, which points to the supreme form of revelation, Yahshua Messiah. But he says early in the 6th chapter that just because grace has abounded, we should not use that as a license or a pretext to sin and abuse the grace. So the grace is given to us in spite of ourselves, but once we are aware of the grace that has been given, we don't want to abuse the grace that we have received now that we know that we have been saved from our sins. So as sin reigned in death, even so grace might reign through righteousness to everlasting life, through Yahshua Messiah, our Master. Sin and death are closely connected. He was promised that he would die that day, but he lived to be 930 years, so the day translation could be 1,000 years. We can liken this to Psalm 90, verse 4. But the grace, even though sin rules the world, it reigns and touches every human, there is a power greater than that, which can uplift some who are stuck in sin, some who still struggle with sin, through the atonement and the merits of the bitter passion. But this reigns in the reign of righteousness culminates at his second coming, and so too does our resurrection. And it's all made possible through the one who is constitutionally capable, the second Adam, who took all the infirmities on the flesh and overcame them and offered us a way out. That's all the time we have for today. So the second Adam, the first Adam was necessary as a prelude in redemptive history. Both respectively represent poles on redemptive history, the one who made it necessary and the one who made it, who finalized it and made it fulfilled and accomplished. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.